Indentured labor system in Guyana, a country on the northern mainland of South America, was established as a result of the abolition of slavery in 1834, which left plantation owners without a source of cheap labor. This led to the introduction of indentured laborers from India, China, and Portugal in 1838. The first group of Indian indentured laborers arrived on May 5, 1838, aboard Whitby. They were promised free passage to Guyana and a return trip after 5 years of service. However, their living conditions were harsh as they were required to work long hours, with minimal breaks and no overtime pay. They were forced to live in cramped and unsanitary living quarters, which lacked basic amenities such as clean water and proper sanitation facilities. Workers were also subjected to physical punishment for not meeting production quotas or breaking plantation rules. The work itself was grueling, involving backbreaking labor in the fields under the hot sun, with the use of primitive tools. Indentured laborers were also vulnerable to disease outbreaks due to poor living conditions and lack of access to medical care. Food rations were meager and inadequate, leading to malnutrition among many workers. They had no job security or freedom of movement, as they were bound by their contracts for a set period of time. Any attempts at resistance or rebellion were met with severe punishments such as flogging or imprisonment. Despite these challenges, they persevered through their contracts in hopes of eventually gaining their freedom and improving their economic situation. Thus, indentured laborers were brought to the country under false pretenses, promised better wages and living conditions than what they actually received. This led to widespread dissatisfaction and unrest among the laborers. The most notable revolt was the Enmore Estate Strike from 1913 to 1914, where sugar workers protested against their working conditions and low wages. It resulted in the death of 5 workers and many others injured, and the incident sparked a wave of protests across other estates, leading to the formation of trade unions. Indentured laborers also resisted by running away from plantations, refusing to work, or sabotaging machinery, and women protested against sexual exploitation by plantation owners. Thus, the program was officially ended in 1917, due to increasing resistance from workers and pressure from anti-indenture movements. While the abolition of indentured labor marked a significant step towards ending this form of exploitation, it did not immediately improve the conditions for former laborers. Many found themselves without work as their contracts had provided them with food and shelter. However, many former laborers were able to establish themselves as small business owners or farmers. Additionally, the British colonial administration favored Indo-Guyanese laborers over African Guyanese workers during the indentured servitude period, creating resentment among the latter group. Mutual distrust began on ships from India, where Afro-West Indians were seamen, and Indians, the human cargo. And suspicions of the other persisted on plantations, where Indians lived separate from Africans, and where Africans were placed in positions of authority over Indians by the British. Also, cultural differences, language and religion, only kept the two groups further apart. Following the British West Indian labor unrest of the 1930s, the Moyne Commission sent from Britain noted deep division between the two largest ethnic groups. It found that the Indo-Guyanese were mainly rural, had retained their traditional culture and participated less in national politics. The Afro-Guyanese, on the other hand, were largely urban workers, had adopted European culture and dominated national politics. The Commission called for increasing the representation of Indo-Guyanese by increased democratization of government. This led to a renewed political movement in Guyana after the Second World War, and 2 new figures emerged in Chady Juggin and Forbes Burnham. Juggin founded the People's Progressive Party in 1950 with Burnham, and together they won elections, with the support of predominantly lower-class Afro-Guyanese and rural Indo-Guyanese workers. However, soon differences between the two grew and they formed rival factions within the PPP, receiving support mainly along racial lines. Later Burnham formed People's National Congress and started to use race as a tool. After Juggin became the Prime Minister in 1961, USA got involved in Guyanese politics to counter Juggin's overtures with the Soviet bloc, by instigating civil unrest in Guyana with the help of Burnham's PNC. Hundreds of Indo-Guyanese died in the subsequent violence, and thousands fled the country. These disturbances further exacerbated the tension and animosity between the two communities. As a result, Juggin was ousted and Burnham came to power in 1964, and an authoritarian regime was set up. Every other election was fraudulent. As noted by various international watchdogs, the PNC controlled all the government agencies, Guyana shifted left and severed ties with the British monarchy, the Indo-Guyanese were marginalized and violence against them normalized. The USA had to intervene once again to finally conduct fair elections in 1992, in which Juggin became the new president. The polls were however marred by violence, as were all the subsequent polls during PPP's rule till 2015, when it was ousted by a grand alliance of multiracial parties but returned back in 2020 under the new president Irfan Ali. The predicament in which the country finds itself was tragically predictable. A winner-takes-all constitution creates a system that pits the two communities against each other in every election. The result is a politics of fear, driven by concerns over ethnic exclusion, marginalization, and victimization. Indo-Guyanese fear that the PNC will rig elections to stay in power, leaning on Afro-Guyanese predominance in the police and military, as they did from 1964 to 1992. While Afro-Guyanese fears are rooted in their numerical disadvantage relative to Indo-Guyanese, and the perception of growing economic inequalities. The discovery of oil makes this situation even more desperate and potentially volatile. The imperative of preventing the other side from controlling the proceeds of oil, and thus entrenching one's advantage to the other's exclusion, animate the fears of each of the major rivals. Today almost 25% of Guyana's population is Hindu, and although the numbers have been declining, the Hindu community has survived and persevered, attempting to keep its traditions alive in the face of many challenges. Even early on, the British policy was clearly to Christianize the Indians, and effectively stamp out their Hindu faith. The Indians were unable to form a unified community due to restrictions on their free movement. This, however, didn't stop the Indians from pursuing their religion. Though lacking both time and freedom, they persisted, and conducted religious gatherings regularly, where philosophies of the Bhagavad Gita and the stories of the epic Ramayana were told. During those earlier years, Christian proselytization attempts had little success. But, as the time passed, much of the characteristics that informed the community's Hindu identity also eroded. This, coupled with the fact that Guyana is one of the poorest countries in South America, made many Hindus susceptible to conversion, especially after the independence of Guyana in 1966. Although, today there are various efforts being put in to preserve the Hindu faith by the country's Hindus. Thus, the legacy of indentured labor in Guyana is a complex and multifaceted one. On one hand, it brought about significant economic growth and development to the country. However, this came at a great cost to the indentured laborers themselves, who were subjected to harsh working conditions and often faced discrimination and exploitation. The diverse cultural mix that resulted from the influx of indentured laborers from India, China, Africa and other parts of the world has shaped modern-day Guyanese identity. This has contributed to a rich cultural heritage that is reflected in everything from language, music and dance, to food. The Indian influence can be widely seen in the languages, food, music, dance and literature of Guyana. But, as we have discussed, there are still ongoing issues that can be traced back to the legacy of indentured labor in Guyana.